From downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program. Public access TV program where the interests and issues of our community are discussed and analyzed. Nowhere else in broadcast TV or radio are there these in-depth conversations and analysis of public interests and issues. Tonight's program is a special program. Our guest is John Beidler, who portrays Commodore Stephen Decatur for the Convention and Visitor Bureau of Decatur. Reverend Beidler is retired minister from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Decatur. He has traveled worldwide. He has a great interest in history, and you will see his love of history as we discuss our namesake, Commodore Stephen Decatur. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
You portray our namesake, Commodore Stephen Decatur.
Yes. And that came about, about 6 years ago at the 175th sesquicentennial of the founding of the city of Decatur, which didn't happen until 1829. Stephen Decatur never visited here, and there are some 30 municipalities, counties, and towns named after Stephen Decatur, and we here in Illinois are the largest of all the cities named after him. But in 2004, I was at a meeting where they were going to have a parade and everything, and somebody said, well, we need somebody to represent Stephen Decatur. And a friend of mine, John Hayes, nudged me and said, you love history and you like public speaking. He said, why don't you try it? And so I raised my hand and put together a uniform at the time with a hat that I borrowed from the Milliken Theater and started doing that. And then years later, it came to my attention that they were looking for someone to do this on behalf of the Decatur Convention and Visitors Bureau. So Jeff Hendricks, who was the director of that, got hold of me, and I said, sure. And then they went online and found a seamstress who does authentic uniforms for typically war and other military uniforms. And this one is that of a Commodore for the War of 1812, which Stephen Decatur fought in. And thus this was tailor-made for me, and the hat is an authentic hat from that era. So I have the great privilege of speaking on behalf of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I do things with the Chamber of Commerce and ribbon cuttings, and address schools and church organizations and nonprofits. And I just really I'm honored to be asked by you to be here on this show.
Historically, Commodore Stephen Decatur was as famous in his day as perhaps General Petraeus is today, or General Schwarzkopf, or even General Eisenhower.
Yes, yeah, he was that popular. Should I go into a little bit of the history of him? Yeah.
Tell us about
it. Well, he was born just after the Revolutionary War. He was born in 1779 by a father who had been a sea captain in the Revolutionary War, Stephen Decatur Sr. And so Junior was born in 1779 in Maryland, raised and brought up in Philadelphia, so he was around ships all his life, and his father being a sea captain himself, he just came to love and look at ships as in time to be what his calling was to be in life. And what's interesting is Stephen's grandfather had actually been a sailor for the French, and the name Decatur comes from France. It's a French derivative, and so Etienne Decatur was a Navy captain for the French prior to his father being, that is Stephen Decatur Jr.'s father being in the Revolutionary War. So Stephen grew up in Philadelphia, saw ships being made, outfitted, and his father being in the Revolutionary War and a sea captain on our very fledgling Navy during that Revolutionary War, I dare say that Stephen Decatur probably knew Jefferson, Adams, Monroe, Madison, Franklin. He probably, because these men were involved, of course, in Congress and commissioned the building of the various early ships for the United States Navy. Very small Navy, but they only had about 6 ships at first. So Stephen Decatur probably grew up around these men. And when he went to sea, first as a midshipman, and later on he was over in the Mediterranean. In 1804, then President Thomas Jefferson decided that they were tired of paying all of these ransoms to the Barbary Coast pirates of North Africa, Algiers, Tunisia, what's today Libya, Tripoli being the center of that. And so Thomas Jefferson commissioned the Commodore, Bainbright, to go over there and do what they could to stop all of this ransom required. They were paying $40,000 and $50,000 to get our ships back from these pirates.
Kind of like today, John, where we have the pirates in Somalia hijacking oil tankers, and so the piracy goes on.
It goes on these 200 and whatever years later. So Stephen Decatur was then a lieutenant, and he was 25 years old, and he volunteered to take a ship, really it's an Arab Barbary Coast pirate ship that they had captured, and sail it into the harbor of Tripoli in the stealth of night. And they had one of two missions on this the stealth kind of commando mission, and that was either to pull out the USS Philadelphia ship, called a frigate. It was about a 36-gun frigate that the Barbary Coast pirates had captured out in the Mediterranean. It had floundered, it had run aground, and they had captured it. And now they were going to use it against all of the British, the French, the Spanish, and the American merchant marines out in the Mediterranean. And it was clearly determined by the Secretary of the Navy and Thomas Jefferson that if they armed that ship and used it against all of these European forces in the United States, you know, the balance would shift over to their side. So Decatur either had to free the Philadelphia up, the USS Philadelphia, or destroy it. And so as he came into the harbor of Tripoli, he was dressed in a Barbary Coast pirate outfit, had a wraparound, you know, Sultan type wraparound headband, and they had captured this ship. So they allowed the name of the ship was the Mastico, and this is February 16th, 1804, to sail in there, and there was the Philadelphia. And they yelled out, and they had somebody on board that spoke the Barbary Coast pirate language, saying that we had lost our anchor and we needed to come upside the Philadelphia and, you know, re-rig with a anchor. And they, thinking this was a pirate ship, they allowed them to come up and then as they got closer, it dawned on those that were guarding the Philadelphia, the ship, that these were not Arab. You know, I mean, these were not pirates. So they came up alongside, threw their grapples across, boarded this, and there was hand-to-hand combat. Stephen Decatur himself was in hand-to-hand sword dagger combat on board the Philadelphia. And they had already set down in the hold of this ship that they brought in all kinds of kegs of gunpowder. The men were assigned various places, and they brought the keg powder out, put it down in the hold of the Philadelphia, and lit 15-minute fuses. And while they battled this, they killed all the pirates, or the pirates jumped overboard, knowing that they were being overwhelmed. And so then the gunpowder started, you know, going off in the hold of the Philadelphia, and Decatur and his men pulled up a jib sail at the front sail of a ship and started pulling away. The firestorm was so great that the wind started feeding it, and it began sucking their ship back in towards the Philadelphia. Alongside it, of course, then they would obviously get, you know, flames jumping over into their boat. So they finally lowered their jib and had oars on it. It was a smaller boat. The men got below and they oared and they pulled away from it. This was held to be, in the era and time, very much like what these Marines did, and in their going into Pakistan and getting Osama bin Laden. This was that stealthy an event in 1804. Stephen Decatur, after this, was awarded captain. He was 25 years old. To this day, he is the youngest naval officer to achieve the rank of captain at age 25. It's never been broken before. So he came back to the United States, really a national hero, beloved by so many people, and went back about 4 years later or 5 years later back to the port of Tripoli, bombarded it, and finally subdued all of that pirating, and stopped finally. And so Stephen Decatur became a huge national hero, beloved.
It's really interesting that Tripoli is back in the news today,
Yes.
A couple hundred years almost after Stephen Decatur sailed into Tripoli's harbor. Now we have our armed forces in Tripoli.
He did in 1804 and 1809, he created a no-sail zone. We're doing a no-fly zone.
Mm-hmm.
Different technology, same mission, to stop what was then a Gaddafi-type person,
Mm-hmm.
you know, back in 1804. So what is that? That's 207 years ago. We're
Sure.
back doing the same thing.
And the Marines' anthem is from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And that's what they're speaking of.
Well, it was actually an event right after Stephen Decatur. That was Stephen Decatur and his exploits there in capturing the Philadelphia and later bombarding it. That all added into it. There was actually a march from Cairo over by the Marines to Tripoli that the song actually rose from, but it was building up from first Decatur and then later this march across the desert and the capturing of a particular town that gave rise to the Marine song. In fact, I was speaking over at a church in Springfield yesterday, and for our post log, the pianist knew it, and so we just broke into singing that song, and there were a couple Marines out in the audience, and we all broke in and stood up and sang the Marine song. It was exciting.
Not only was Commodore Stephen Decatur brave and courageous, he was a well-educated guy.
He was. He went to an Episcopal school. His mom wanted him to become an Episcopal minister and priest, but he soon recognized that the call of the sea and the sail was what he wanted to do. Very well educated. He was very athletic. If you'll notice that our statue outside the Civic Center with the columns of the Stephen Decatur High School behind it, the leftovers of it, that, you know, he stands very erect. He's rather thin. He wasn't real tall. He wasn't even 6 feet tall, but he was an excellent swimmer, excellent marksman, and very, very athletic. And so both his education with his background of his father and the academies that he was sent through, he never said that he excelled in school, but he was had a voracious appetite for learning. And he would study the other sea captains and so on, and the others that had preceded him, both his father and grandfather, and he would learn from them. And he recognized this one principle, and there's probably about 5 books written on Stephen Decatur, and I've read most of all 5 of them. And that is that he said that to affect the change from on the outside in your circumstances in life, you need to go to work on yourself. You need to develop your own leadership skills, your own self-discipline. And so when he would go, if you will, working on the inner self, he found that the circumstances of his life changed. And therein, in terms of the resources he had, he just was very loyal to America, very dedicated to the cause of democracy in the United States, and the need for a strong, presence in both the Navy and ground for our defense of our country. And he's famous for this great phrase, that says, in the relationship of our country with other nations of the world, may the United States always be right. But he said, right or wrong, always the United States. And that was what he was famous for, which has some political, ramifications. Maybe when we're wrong, we need to be, careful. But as a country, he was very, very loyal to the mission and purpose of the United States.
His quote was paraphrased into the famous aphorism, "My country, right or wrong."
Right or wrong,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Yes.
I had the great honor a few years ago. My wife and I went to Washington, D.C., and the Decatur House is right out the front door of the White House. And Lafayette Square is the park right out front of the front doors of the White House. And over on the far left, next to the Vice President's offices and the CIA, is the Stephen Decatur House. And so I had already been, portraying Stephen Decatur in the parade and so on. So I walked in there and I got to meet the curator of this now a National Historic Man home site and museum. Well, I told the curator that I was from Decatur, Illinois. Wow, he was just saying, well, that is really nice. I don't get to meet a lot of people from Decatur, Georgia, Alabama, Indiana, and Ohio, and all the other states. And I said, not only that, I portray Stephen Decatur. Whoa, he just got so excited, and every time he would see me around, he'd call me the Commodore, and in fact, he took me around to places in the Decatur house that he doesn't normally take tours, and one of the things I did is I got to stand by the very window where the body of Stephen Decatur, having been in a duel, was shot and where he died. He died in 1820.
A young man.
Yes, 41 years old. And this curator told me a lot about Stephen Decatur. He was so well beloved that 10,000 people showed up for his funeral. Every justice of the Supreme Court, the president, the vice president, nearly all of the cabinet, and both houses of Congress, nearly all of them showed up for his funeral. That's how beloved. And the curator said that probably had Stephen Decatur not been killed in this duel, he probably would have run and probably would have won the presidency of the United States.
How did he get involved in this duel?
He was in contention with another Commodore because he came back as captain in 1804 and then fought in the War of 1812, but was imprisoned a couple times. The British caught his ship in New York Harbor, and so he got imprisoned, and he would escape, and they'd catch him again. The British would, and he would get released again. His men would get him out. But he fought in the War of 1812. But what happened just in the leading up to the War of 1812, there was another Commodore, James Barron, who had loaded up his ship in New York Harbor. The British were already beginning to blockade because, mind you, the British and the French were already in war with each other. Napoleon in 1800 had crowned himself emperor of France, and it was already conquering huge parts of Europe. And so the British were in war with the French. Well, this little fledgling country, United States, was beginning to do commerce with the French, and the British wanted us to stop it. They wanted to stop our ships. Cotton and other great produce from the United States were crossing the Atlantic and going into France. And so the British blockaded New York Harbor, and this Commodore, James Barron, had loaded his ship down so heavily that he couldn't get to his cannons. So he starts to exit the harbor of Decatur, the harbor of New York, and the British captured his ship because he couldn't fight back. Well, it was determined that, and he was actually court-martialed, the James Barron, the Commodore. He kept pleading with the commissioners who assigned various ship captain assignments, commissioned them, appealed to them to try to get another ship. Stephen Decatur just felt he was incompetent to ever do that, to ever allow his ship, knowing that the blockade was out there. And then the British re-rigged that ship and used it against the United States in the War of 1812. So James Barron, as many will do, the officers of their day, finally challenged Stephen Decatur, then Commodore, to a duel. It had already been banned in the District of Columbia, so they went across the way to Maryland. And in duels, you always have a second, and they actually handle the gun and load it in the powder and put in everything, and they call off the paces. But James Barron convinced Stephen Decatur's second, who loaded the guns and kind of watched over the duel, to only 6 paces, I understand. The normal is 10. James Barron claiming that he had poor eyesight. So Stephen Decatur, not really thinking that James Barron would shoot to kill, allowed 6 paces. Well, James Barron shot Stephen Decatur right in the gut, and he took the lead bullet right in his stomach, and Stephen Decatur just shot and grazed James Barron's leg, and he later recovered. But 6 hours later, Decatur, taken back to his house there at Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., bled to death. James Barron never got a commission. In fact, he left the United States, went over to England for a long period of time. He just left in ignominy and disgrace because he shot this great man that was so beloved by so many in America, Stephen Decatur Jr. And then after that, now mind you, our city of Decatur, to which Stephen Decatur never visited. Stephen Decatur probably never visited a single one of the towns that are named after him in the United States. There is a Decatur High School, by the way, in Maryland, where he was born, and he's buried in Philadelphia. And I just ran across somebody at the church I was speaking at yesterday who happened to be in Philadelphia, and they walked by in this Episcopal church, and there they saw the name Stephen Decatur Jr. on a tombstone. They just were elated that I was there speaking. Well, Stephen Decatur, having banned that, James Barron never was given a commission. He had to leave the United States, and he died an older man. Stephen Decatur, though, never visited most all of the towns. We were founded in 1829. This duel in which he died was in 1820. So even 9 years, the founding fathers of this city, as they laid out Main and Main Street in about a 9-acre plot that became the city of Decatur here in central Illinois in Macon County, they still so beloved and honored this national hero, Stephen Decatur, that they chose to use his name as the name of this city.
So our city, our namesake, is named after an illustrious and heroic American.
He is, and you know, I just think that what's interesting also too, and Bob Falstrom wrote this article in the Herald and Review, and Bob and I were at a meeting, a genealogical society meeting, and I was dressed as I am now in the Commodore, and I was saying how that, you know, Stephen Decatur Jr. married the daughter of the mayor of Norfolk, Virginia, Susan Wheeler. In 1809 he married her. They never had any children. They built this house. It took them about 2 years. Built it in 1818 and was finished soon after, very soon thereafter. Stephen Decatur died. But here, Susan Wheeler had been courted by Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, Jerome Bonaparte, and also Aaron Burr had dated or courted Susan Wheeler, but Stephen Decatur ended up winning her hand and marrying her. I think there is the makings of a phenomenal movie. I either want to get hold of Ken Burns, Ken, if you're watching, get hold of me, get hold of Bill Faber, excuse me, or Bob Falstrom with the Herald Review. I think we've got a making of a grand movie. We've got war, we've got romance, you know, we've got money and intrigue. No doubt Susan Wheeler probably was over and met Napoleon himself with Jerome, his brother, you know, dating her. I think we've really got the making of an excellent movie. And the War of 1812 200th anniversary is coming upon us. Mm-hmm. You know, next year, 2012 is the 200th. So there are many, many reenactments going on of the War of 1812. So anyway, I think a great movie could be made of Stephen Decatur, and I know of none. Referenced often in various places, but no movie that I know of has ever been made of this great heroic and bold and very loyal man.
It's interesting how there's an illustrious figure in contemporary times, Stephen Decatur, and then history kind of forgets the hero.
Yes, yes. Obviously, had he not died and gone on to at least the nomination, if not, who knows, been president of the United States, we'd all know former President, you know, Decatur of the United States. But no, he died age 41. And his legacy, though, in all these towns and municipalities and counties named after him certainly lives on. And I always like to emphasize for those of us here in Decatur that he was not only heroic, but he was a beloved leader. In the ship that he had captured from the Barbary Coast pirates and sailed into the Tripoli harbor to burn the Philadelphia, he could have just commanded various seamen to be a part of this. But rather than do that, Stephen Decatur went on board what was the USS Constitution, and he asked for the crews, as they lined up, to step forward if they would like to volunteer. Every crew member wanted to be under the leadership of Stephen Decatur. They all stepped forward, and we have records of this because these were all military actions, naval actions, so there are logs of all these events. These are not stories made up. We've got clear, the Naval Academy and Rhode Island's got historical records of all this. These men all stepped forward, knowing that it was just like these guys, the SEALs that went in to get Osama bin Laden. These guys all volunteered, and they went in with Stephen Decatur because they wanted to be under this man's leadership. They so loved and respected him. Just as an example, you know, as a captain, you have the right to whip somebody, and what they have is the cat o' nine tails. And we have this phrase, "Let the cat out of the bag." Well, the cat o' nine tails whip was kept in a leather pouch, and if anybody let the cat out of the bag, they knew bad things were about to happen. So that's where we get that phrase, letting the cat out of the bag. Well, there was an incident where Stephen Decatur, captain of a ship, was leaving at a particular time in the morning, and one of his crewmen didn't show up. And the crewman later had to get another boat to get him out because they departed. They had already left shore. Well, when that seaman finally got on board, rather than, as he had the right to do, flog the guy, because this was AWOL, I mean, there was no report of where he was, Stephen Decatur had him brought to his quarters and found out that this man had somebody else that was supposed to have come and awakened him so he'd be there, and the guy never showed up. Stephen Decatur did not flog him. He chastised him. But the crew recognized that Stephen Decatur was just and fair, and didn't automatically assume that because somebody, broke the rules, that they either intended to do that or that they should automatically be cat o' nine tail flogged. Or the term we have, you feel like you're over the barrel. Well, they would strap guys on a barrel, and that's where they would flog them. So, he was a great leader that was beloved and followed by the men of the Navy of his day.
This has been an exciting interview with history, and
Good.
Commodore Stephen Decatur. We ran out of time. It's gone so fast, Commodore.
It has.
John Beidler, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We're really lucky to have you in our community doing this and bringing history alive.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.